Thank you to everyone for joining us here today, lovers of history, social justice, music, and architecture. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, a group of dedicated individuals committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of our city. Our warmest thanks to the board and the residents of 300 West End Avenue. A very warm welcome to Pamela Frank, to Gina Belafonte, to all members of the family who might be tuned in, and to each of you and to each of our speakers for joining us here today to commemorate the remarkable life and work of activist and performer Harry Belafonte. This Zoom program today is being recorded and the video available without charge through the Diamonstein-Spielvogel Video Archives, part of the David Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Duke University. And now our program. Harry Belafonte was a warrior for social justice, at the forefront of the fight for civil rights, and a remarkable and always absorbing entertainer. Excuse me. President Biden recently said at his passing that Harry Belafonte used his talent and voice to help redeem the soul of our nation. Born in Harlem in 1927 to West Indian immigrants, his mother a housekeeper and his father a chef. In 1936, Harry, his mother, and his younger brother Dennis moved to Jamaica. Unable to find work there either, his mother returned to New York, while Belafonte and his brother remained in Kingston with relatives. Although his mother always wanted him to get a good education, he struggled with dyslexia. And after a year at George Washington High School, dropped out. Then had a brief stint in the Navy from 1944 to 1945, and found employment as a janitor's assistant. And you might say, at that point, fate intervened. One evening, Belafonte, at his janitor's job, was given 2 tickets as a gratuity to a performance of the American Negro Theater. That night, he found his calling, and soon after joined the A&T Productions and started taking acting classes at German emigre director Erwin Piscator's workshop at the New School, alongside other aspiring performers such as Marlon Brando, Tony Curtis, and Sidney Poitier. To pay for the acting classes, Belafonte started to sing in nightclubs and quickly achieved fame as both an actor and a singer. He was the first recording artist to sell over 1 million copies of a single album with Calypso in 1956, and the hit single Deo, the Banana Boat song, which introduced American audiences to the Caribbean art form. He was, as well, the first Black performer to win an Emmy in 1960. The recipient of many honors, including a Tony in 1954 for his role in the musical review John Murray Anderson's Almanac, 3 Grammys in 1962, 1965, and a Lifetime Achievement Grammy. In 2000, the Kennedy Center Honors. In 1989, the National Medal of the Arts. In 1994, an Oscar, the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award. In 2014, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Belafonte starred in films such as Carmen Jones, An Island in the Sun, and Uptown Saturday Night. His final screen appearance was in Spike Lee's Black Klansman in 2018. Though he is best known for his remarkable success as a singer and actor, the multi-talented Belafonte continually used his public prestige to advance the struggle for social justice and civil rights. He has said he was an activist before he was an artist. He certainly was instrumental in his support for the freedom rides. He supported voter registration drives and helped to organize the 1963 March on Washington. Throughout his life, he remained a fervent activist and outspoken advocate for justice. His close friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King was cut short by Reverend King's assassination, but Belafonte continued to support King's family and vision in numerous ways. He also founded several not-for-profits, including Sankofa, which his daughter Gina currently runs. Sankofa is a Ghanaian term, a symbol that translates to looking back at the past to inform the future. Belafonte was a cultural advisor for the Peace Corps, a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, and Amnesty International named him Ambassador of Conscience. In the 1980s, he worked to end apartheid in South Africa and coordinated Nelson Mandela's first visit to the United States. His apartment at 300 West End Avenue always served as a refuge and meeting place for the many artists, activists, and civil rights leaders who were his friends. It is an honor and a privilege today to recognize his remarkable life and work. And now for our program. Public relations guru Ken Sunshine is the founder of Ken Sunshine Consultants, more than 250 employees and offices in New York, Los Angeles, Washington, Atlanta, San Francisco, and Austin. He's worked with clients ranging from leading corporations, nonprofits, and unions. But his initial and long-term clients, many of you are aware, include Barbara Streisand, Local 1199, and the Democratic Convention, first one in New York in contemporary times. He is the recipient of many honors for his work, and he currently serves on the Board of Trustees of the City University of New York, 25 colleges, 275,000 students. He is also a member of the Legislative Committee of the Metropolitan Museum of Arts and a voting member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He is a longtime representative of Harry Belafonte and his family. Ken, perhaps you could tell us about your relationship with Harry Belafonte and how you met. Was he interested in your political skills or your musical skills or both?
I've got to say, he certainly wasn't interested in my musical skills, and Lord knows, I mean, he liked my politics, but I think he liked the fact that I was a good audience for his stories. And frankly, I had a lot of stories and he would laugh. I very consciously tried to get him to laugh as much as I could. And one of the joys of my, crazy career is getting to know Harry Belafonte as long as I did from the beginning of my firm in the early 90s. Harry we couldn't have been prouder of him as to be a client. He was also probably one of the worst clients we've ever had because he would never listen. I have a deal when I represent people, particularly in the entertainment world, that they got to at least listen to me. He would barely pay lip service to what I would say. And usually I was trying to talk him down on something or talk him into doing press that he didn't want to do. But it was just a joy to argue with him. I would lose most of the time, but he always knew that I was trying to do what was right for him, for the projects that he did, to deal with the world of the media. And, he knew the media was often looking to be negative, to nitpick, to typecast him in a certain way. And he really didn't care. He was a masterful communicator, but he was not a masterful promoter of himself, for better or for worse. But I have so many great memories of working with him and being privileged to watch him wheel and deal. I'll tell one story having to do with Nelson Mandela. I was David Dinkins' first chief of staff. I was in the government, but I'd already gotten to know Belafonte. Mandela gets out of prison, and Harry Belafonte is in charge of his tour of America. And first stop is New York. So we wanted to, the culmination after a ticker tape parade and just wonderful celebrations of this icon who had been in prison for 27 years. And Mayor Dinkins had him stay at Gracie Mansion, which was a big thrill. The culmination was going to be a concert at Yankee Stadium. But there were two problems. One, we hadn't reserved Yankee Stadium yet. And two, the promoter of the concert was supposed to be Bill Graham, but Bill Graham had an argument with the ANC, and we were left without a promoter. So Harry calls me. I'm supposed to be running New York City at a really tough time. And he said, look, in his inimitable way, I need you more than the city does. The city is going to live. There's going to be crime. There's going to be potholes there, and there are going to be things. But there's only once that Nelson Mandela needs us. I was sold. I basically told my friend Bill Lynch and David Dinkins that I'm going to spend most of my time for the next week helping to plan the tour of New York. Well, I called our friend Ron Delsner, who became the promoter of the concert. But Ron said, you got to convince George Steinbrenner to give you Yankee Stadium, which is no small feat. Harry and I and the mayor went to see George Steinbrenner. And Steinbrenner was very clear that he didn't want to, but for the bigger cause, he would give us Yankee Stadium, but you better not mess up my field. And nobody could be more charming than Mr. Belafonte. He charmed George Steinbrenner. We got Yankee Stadium. Harry is basically calling acts and putting a show together in a precious few days. But you know what? It worked. It became the signature part of the beginning of Mandela's tour of America. And it just says something about Harry. The way I remember Harry, look, there are many entertainers, many of whom I've represented or represent, who want to do good in this world. And many of them are very much want their progressive politics to be out there as they have their day job as an entertainer, but use their celebrity to do good. Nobody did it at the level of Harry Belafonte. He was arguably the biggest star in the world in the late 50s, first gold record at the pinnacle of a career, and a relatively young man then. Politics and changing the world took over his life and took over his career. And he didn't care. He didn't say, I should be a martyr. There were bookings that he lost. There were things that he could have done creatively as the world of entertainment changed. And yet he couldn't have been prouder to spend most of his time changing the world. And, the relationship with him and Dr. King in the civil rights movement, getting all those entertainers to come to the march in Washington. He did all that, and they all would say that. And then just constant involvement. We Are the World. That was Harry's idea. Hands Across America. All that was Harry Belafonte. And but he would do it with a style. There was nobody cooler than Harry Belafonte, but he would do it with a real purposeful air where he was not screwing around, where the way a lot of celebrities approached activism. So we, should all be, those of us that got to know him, I couldn't be prouder of those moments, but also it's a calling card to getting off our butts, no matter how old we were. He was still yelling at me that I wasn't involved more than I was the last couple of months. And he did it again with humor, with style, but he did it with real a purposeful air that again is often lacking in entertainers and celebrities doing good. So we should remember him, and I couldn't be more thankful to Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel for this idea to put a permanent plaque at 300 West End Avenue. I don't know if I'm going to steal some of Ron Carter's words, but remember the context of this. Harry and Julie Belafonte wanted to go rent an apartment. This is in the liberal West Side on West End Avenue. And they were denied, for obvious reasons, the ability to get to rent an apartment. So of course, when Harry went out, put money together and bought the damn building, and then Lena Horne and Ron Carter and other entertainers and people not of the Caucasian persuasion integrated that building. He had one of the great apartments in New York, and that's where Dr. King called his New York home, and so many other celebrities did. But to memorialize that couldn't be a more appropriate way to remember the great and the one and only Harry Belafonte.
Thank you, Ken. What's the most interesting and important thing that you learned from working for so long and so intimately with Harry Belafonte?
Don't listen to people in authority, particularly those in entertainment. You're probably smarter than they are. And also, don't worry about money so much. That, I've done okay. Harry did fine. You don't have to be the richest. Don't let money dictate what you do with your life and your career. And you see so many examples of that today where people are not afraid to take stands. Nobody at the level of Harry, but they don't let the almighty dollar be the only ingredient in what you do professionally.
The perfect note to say thank you for sharing those stories, and thank you for that advice. Now, we will move to Ron Carter. Is he back on screen, I hope? Ron Carter is a renowned musician, respected composer, educator, and author, and among the most original, prolific, and influential bassists in jazz in the world. He has recorded over 2,200 albums and holds a Guinness Book of Records to prove it. He was a member of the renowned Miles Davis Quintet and can be heard on many iconic jazz albums of the 60s and 70s. His 60-year career, incomparable career, excuse me, spans an extraordinary variety of music genres. He's recorded with Roberta Flack, Billy Joel, Bette Midler, Paul Simon, and Aretha Franklin. He's also the recipient of numerous honors, including 3 Grammy Awards, 7 honorary doctorates, Japan's Order of the Rising Sun, and the French Minister of Culture's Commander of the Order of Arts and Letters. He has the most distinguished career in jazz of anyone I know or have ever heard of. He was a distinguished professor emeritus at City College, a former faculty member at the Manhattan School of Music, and he's been on the Juilliard jazz faculty since 2008. To bring you up to date, You can hear him tonight at the Blue Note. But before you do that, welcome Ron Carter.
Hey, thank you. And I will be welcome to everyone who shows up. You'll get my handshake for being not just my friend, but knowing who Harry Belafonte was. I have a big secret that I'll expose right now, that I always kept a secret because I thought that I need an edge on people. Well, my edge was that Harry Belafonte was my landlord. What a gracious, brilliant, bright, handsome, wonderful singer to have as a landlord. I think the story how I got into this building is one that people who live in New York looking for an upgrade or a larger space than they're living need to find out. My late wife and I were walking down West End Avenue. We had been to several apartments around the mid-'80s. And we were told that they were interested in having their apartment filled, but they didn't want musicians. Well, I said, not even a good one? Well, that wasn't quite the answer that got me in. So my wife and I continued to walk along. We saw this building further down the street. And we went in to see if took a chance what they were having any vacancies. They said, well, they were looking to try to increase their spaces that they had vacancies. And I went on to fill out the application and see where it goes. Well, I said, okay. So we filled it out. And as we were leaving, the person said, well, Harry Belafonte is part of the responsibility of making tenants available. So we'll give you his application and we'll contact you if there's a chance that you can move into this building. The backstory to this is, of course, Harry Belafonte was the first African-American to have a million-seller record, LP. That's this big. And to make a million-seller was clearly amazing to all of us in the music industry, especially as a vocalist singing a specific native language, Caribbean. So at this time, Harry was getting very busy in New York. He's doing concerts, he's making records. And his musical director happened to be the person who was a big contract in the New York music scene, especially interested in having people of color do these projects, the various commercial recordings. And he became a very good friend of mine and called me for some of his records. Well, I guess Harry had seen the applications that were coming in to see who was applying to live in this building. And he saw that my application had the word musician. So he asked my friend, do you know this guy? And this person said, why do you ask him? So Harry told him that he was applying to get in my building. So my friend told him, well, Harry, you should let him in last week. I've been here over 50 years, thanks to Harry and my friend who trusted my sense of adulthood. When Harry and I talked, it was never about politics. He wanted to know about the bass. He wanted to know about music. He wanted to know how I picked those notes I picked and what happened when someone didn't like them. I said, well, Mr. Belafonte, I never called him Harry. Mr. Belafonte, I think that my choice is as good as they're going to find. And if they're the right person who's listening to me, they may like mine better. He said, well, Ron, don't forget that idea. Just kind of keep plugging along, and at some point you'll find notes that everybody wants to hear. I've trusted his judgment all these years, even though he's no longer with us, and have been happy to follow his advice. Harry was known to be a very social person. Social in that he wasn't just locked into his physical environment. And several times when I was working in New York over the past years in the 60s and 70s, Harry would come in with several people and take a table near the band and enjoy the music. I thought that was incredible. I mean, here's this person who's got these accolades behind him, who's a moving figure in the world of civil rights, and who's got some great points of view of how to make stuff more equal. And just talking the talk and walking the walk. He's sitting down in front of me with a bottle of beer or soda water, listening to us play some jazz songs with some wonderful jazz players. So now this guy, whoever he is, not knowing him very well, he's got a sense of a big picture of the world. And I couldn't imagine having this person who's that influential in the world to be the guy who I'm writing a check to get my rent. I thought that was astonishing. Harry was a gentle person. He loved my kids as he loved his kids. He would get up in the morning, we would talk in the front as we were getting our morning newspapers, and he asked me how was the gig last night and how did I get up so early in the morning with the kids and work until late. I say, Harry, that's what I do. I'm a bass player of occupation, but I'm a dad too. He was a very, very gentle person, but he had a steely look at him that when you knew that here comes a big point, give it your undivided attention. Before you knew it, bam, the idea was in your head that he gave you a sense of another view of looking at life as we knew it. He was a person who had varied interests that most people didn't get a chance to see because they knew him as a civil rights icon. Some of them knew his singing, but that wasn't their view of him. Here's a person who made the civil rights be in bright lights because he spoke the language of civil rights. He understood what equality meant. He understood that we weren't all getting it. And he was the first person to stand up for his career. He put his career on the line to make sure everyone could get in and see him, as a very simple example. We miss him. Later on in his life, when he was kind of winding down his career, and he had moved from the building and gone on to another part of his life, I knew where he lived. And one day I called him and said, Harry, Mr. Belafonte, I want to come by and just kind of spend a moment with you. I'll bring my bass. He said, oh, would you really do that? I said, Mr. Belafonte, I've been picking it up for 65 years. Another 2 blocks won't hurt me. So I went to his residence and we played and he sang for about an hour. And what a better way for me to pay a tribute to a loving person, a great person, the person who can call not just my friend, but my landlord. Thank you very much, Harry. I know you're here, and I'm with you too. Thanks.
Excuse me. Thank you, Ron Carter. Those incredibly moving stories. I wish you brought your bass today. I should have asked. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is the award-winning producer, director,
Love you, Harry.
actress, and activist, Gina Belafonte, the youngest of Julie and Harry Belafonte's children, co-founder with her father of the not-for-profit Sankofa. For more than 25 years, she's used her art to communicate messages of hope and civic engagement. She was the lead producer of the documentary and film on the life and legacy of Harry Belafonte, Sing Your Song, which was selected to open the 2011 Sundance Festival. Gina and her father were also executive producers of Lyrics from Lockdown, hip-hop multimedia production on the impact of wrongful imprisonment and mass incarceration. Gina is based in Los Angeles, where she is today. She's currently on the board of Second Call and is board chair of the Actors Gang Theater, founded by Tim Robbins. Might you speak about your relationship with your father? An activist yourself, how did your father's work impact your own life choices?
Well, greetings to everyone, and thank you, Barbara, for this honoring. I really appreciate it, and thank you to everyone who is participating and those who are watching. Both my parents were very active in the civil rights movement, and they never pressured any of us to be in the movement or do anything. I think, happened to love to tag along. I was always of great interest of what was going on and what was happening at our home in 300 West End Avenue. It was sort of, my brother says, it was like a revolving door of artists and activists that would come through. And I would just, sneak down while they were having their meetings or their parties and just kind of listen and look and soak in as much as I possibly could. And then as I got older, and my father would take me to different events and gatherings and meetings, I began to learn a lot more. And he introduced me to a man by the name of Bo Taylor, who was a gang interventionist. And that was when my sort of tables turned. And through, I think, just, growing up in the space of activism, and then really having a deeper calling within myself, I began to engage in my own activism and my own organizing. And I'm so grateful to have had a very close relationship with my father, for him to have mentored me in this area and in this space, not just the arts and entertainment, but also in the world of activism and organizing.
What's the most important message you would like to share with the public about your father? You can pick more than one.
Well, he was a very complicated person. And when I say complicated, I mean he always was thinking about what he could do to help bring justice more forward in the daily lives of the human experience. And he also had an incredible sense of humor, and he was very, very funny. But he was also extremely unique in his approach to how he engaged with the world, how he engaged with his family. And I have to say, I'm glad I chose him as a father, and I'm grateful to have had him for as long as I did. And I know, our family, some are here listening, that, we're grateful that he chose to hang around for as long as he did, because, to the very end, he was very sharp with his point of view and his humor. And thank God, Pamela came into his life to help him to see the end in a loving environment.
Well, I hear nothing but wonderful things about her too.
Yes, she's wonderful, wonderful. I love her. She was so, and is so, honoring and took such great care of my dad.
Any other message you'd like to give us about the one and only Harry Belafonte?
Well, I hope that people, continue his legacy, where we all have the opportunity to do that. He was a great example of how he was able to use his platform. And I think if we all take a look at ourselves and deeply understand that we all have an opportunity to shape the world we live in, and to influence it and to change it if need be, that we should take the opportunity to do so in his memory.
Thank you. Thank you. You do him proud.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Our next guest, the WQXR weekday evening host and creator of the podcast Every Voice with Terrance McKnight, is our next guest. Terrance is the author of the forthcoming book, Concert Black, to be published this year by Abrams Press. He's a prolific presenter of diverse global music, a podcast creator, commentator, curator, concert host, writer, and pianist. His former radio show, All Ears with Terrance McKnight, also on WQXR, was honored with an ASCAP James Taylor Radio Broadcast Award, and in 2010, he serves on the board of McDowell and the artistic advisor, the Harlem Chamber Players. Thank you, Terrance McKnight, for joining us today.
It's an honor.
Much of your important work explores previously unexamined aspects of classical music. For example, Black representation in opera. More since last year, and the next season will be coming. But in what ways did the life and work of Harry Belafonte affect your own career path?
I met Belafonte, Mr. B, physically 10 years ago. But my earliest memories of seeing television included Mr. B and Sidney Poitier. I grew up in Cleveland. My parents came from Mississippi, and they didn't allow us, my siblings and I, to watch a lot of television. They were very particular about the things we watched. And so I watched, you know, Saturday mornings, Spider-Man, Superman. But then on the movies, I watched the real Superman, like Poitier and Belafonte. And I never understood exactly why my parents limited our viewing so much. Well, 10 years ago, you know, when I think about Mr. B, I think about something Maya Angelou said. She said, you may not, she said, people may not always remember what you say. They may not always remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Well, when I met Mr. B 10 years ago, I remember what he said. I remember what he did. I remember how he made me feel. I remember what he had on that day.
Why don't you tell us how you came to know him and what was the connection?
Well, I had gone to a birthday party, celebrating 100th birthday of Janet Wolfe, who was involved with orchestral music in New York City. Well, it was rumored that Mr. B was her friend and that he may show up at this event. Well, he did. And there were about 10 of us at this event when he and Pamela came. And when he walked in the door, there was like a halo. He had on this like tracksuit, and he came in and the room felt silent. And I had asked the host prior to him coming, I said, would it be okay if I were to ask him something about Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, because I was working on a documentary? And she said, yeah, that should be okay. But before I had a chance to introduce myself to him, Janet Wolfe introduced me to him. And before I had a chance to say a word, he said, the work you're doing over at the radio station is important. Keep going. And I thought, oh my goodness, you mean this man has been listening to me on the radio? He thinks that I have a voice and that what I'm saying is important. Little did I know that back in 1949, he was involved with the Committee for the Negro in the Arts, which really looked at Black representation in radio and in television. And so what he said had a lot of depth, a lot of experience, and it just energized me to this day. I mean, here's someone, when I open a microphone to speak in radio, I always thought, what if Mr. B is listening? You know, I want to be able to speak truth. I want to be able to speak with courageousness. I want to be able to speak in a way that's going to bring people in with some humor and with a lot of love. Because I remember that first time meeting him, you know, he was so funny. He listened to what we were talking about, and he found a way of bringing some humor that really disarmed the whole room, that, you know, of folks who were just a little anxious about him being there. And I remember that about him. He just made me feel encouraged. He made me feel listened to. He made me feel seen. And he made me feel that the work that I was doing was meaningful.
What are you working on now that reflects some of his role model?
Well, you know, when I went to college, I sang in the Glee Club, same Glee Club that Dr. King sang in. And we sang songs like, Matilda, 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 she take my money and run. We said to Jamaica. And we sang these songs that Belafonte made famous. We sang a song called Fare You Well that Belafonte recorded.
How does
And
that,
so, I'm sorry?
how does that song go?
Fare you well, fare you well, if I never ever see you anymore. And so when I curated the Charles White exhibit exhibit from MoMA. Charles White did a fantastic piece of Mr. Belafonte, and I had to curate music to the images. And I curated him singing that song because of what he said about Charles White. You know, I learned something about friendship and, you know, dedication to friendship from Mr. Belafonte, you know, he helped so many folks in their career, so many artists. And what he said about Charles White, he said, Charles was like a brother to me. I miss him dearly. And Charles, wherever you are, heaven or hell, make space for me. I'll never forget that. It was about this strong friendship and this connection that I've carried, you know, with me since he said that. And, you know, as I think about the documentaries that I've done 7. I did one on Mr. B a few years ago, and he sent me a note and he said, my family and I listened to this documentary and it was wonderful. And he was the only living person that I've done a documentary on because I wanted to pay tribute to him while he was alive. You know, I wanted to give him flowers when he could smell them. And that was my way of, you know, saying thank you for creating this sort of roadmap for me to follow. He talked a lot about Paul Robeson and how important Robeson was to him and how dedicated to the cause of humanity that Robeson was. So me as an artist, I don't have to try to create a new path. You know, I just look at his footsteps. And if I can just walk in a few of those, you know, that's sort of been my roadmap, my template, just following somebody who had the courage to show up in Mississippi in the 1960s and 1964, when my family was there trying to make a move on civil rights. Belafonte showed up with a bag of cash, you know, in the hotbed of Ku Klux Klan territory. He showed up with cash trying to help folks and ended up helping people that I knew, my family members and people in our community in small town Mississippi. And so being here talking about him and listening to other folks talk about him and seeing Gina on the screen is very meaningful for me because it says that I've just come a little closer to the example that he set for me and for so many others.
Well, thank you, Terrance, for that very moving and memorable paean to Harry Belafonte. Thanks so much. We look forward to your book. And now our next speaker is widely recognized, I might say universally recognized, as the recording industry's most innovative and influential executive. 5-time Grammy winner, Clive Davis, was a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of New York University and an honors graduate and a scholarship student from Harvard Law School. If I remember what was said earlier, Harry Belafonte's records from RCA were coming out at the same time that you were graduated from Harvard. By 1960, Clive Davis was offered the job of general counsel at Columbia Records and began his remarkable musical career. Only 5 years later, he became the president of Columbia Records. He later founded Arista Records, named for a high school honor society to which he belonged, and J Records, I assume for your middle name, and served as the chair and CEO of the RCA Music Group. He is now the chief creative officer of Sony Music Entertainment and the only non-musical, non-performer, if you can call him that, who has been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Songwriters Hall of Fame. I'll just mention a few of the people that Clive Davis is credited with discovering. Janis Joplin, Carlos Santana, Bruce Springsteen, Patti Smith, and many, many, many others. He worked for many years with Whitney Houston, still does with Alicia Keys, did with Aretha Franklin and Dionne Warwick, and Barry Manilow. As far as I know, he even named the song Mandy. And Jennifer Hudson. Welcome, Clive. Can we start by your speaking about your relationship with Harry? When did you first meet him? And what is your view? How would you assess his contribution?
Well, let me make it clear. I only met Harry Belafonte at public functions. He could not have been more gracious. He seemed to be aware of what I was doing in music, but I never knew him in any capacity like your previous speakers, certainly his daughter or Ron or Ken. So that I'm really here to put in perspective his uniqueness, and also to maybe put a little bit more emphasis on his musical stature, because I will talk about, and we've heard all about, his political activism and his meaningful roles in promoting equality and civil rights. But musically, I've just got to say, and I'm proud of the artists, whether it's Joplin, whether it's Bruce, whether it's Whitney, Aretha, etc. You put on the radio, you hear his voice for 1 second, may I say, and you know that's Harry Belafonte. It could be no other artist. It is Harry Belafonte. And here it is. We talked about, what was it, 1956 that Ken Sunshine began with. So we're a good 67 years later. And so deservedly, we're doing this program on him, his role in society, his effect upon people. He was unique. He was really so very special. And I've been in music, as you've expressed, for more than 50 years. And I've had my share of interaction with some of the greatest musical artists. But some of them obviously spoke out on civil rights. Some of them took positions on political issues. But no one, over these decades, no one has really spoken out more effectively than Harry Belafonte. Now, tracing back his ascent to the top of the music charts in the 1950s coincided with segregation being very widespread. And although he did love music and he loved his hit records, and they were totally unique, I've got to stop for a minute, because his music, he started a revolution. He created a craze for Caribbean music with records like Deo, the Banana Boat Song, and Jamaica Farewell. And both of those songs were in an album called Calypso. And Calypso, it went in 1956 straight to #1 on the Billboard chart. And it stayed right up there for 31 weeks. So that when we talk, it shouldn't just be in passing. That when you mention those songs, or Lead Man Holler, or Hold 'em Joe, or Ron mentioned, of course, Matilda, and then there was Scarlet Ribbons. He was indeed on the top of the world of music. And I don't forget that, being a student of musical history, being a student of those artists that affected the lives of millions of people all over really the world. It is true, uniquely for him, that music was not his primary focus. His primary focus, indeed, as has been expressed here today, was always civil rights. And it's true that early in his career, he befriended the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and as an ardent supporter, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Dr. King on both their quest for racial equality. He put up much of the seed money for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he was one of the principal fundraisers for Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was the one that came up with the money to bail Dr. King out of jail. And he took a very visible part, as has been expressed here today, on the March on Washington in 1963. So it's very hard to think of other performers whose music was creating a brand new tradition, a brand new sound, a brand new musical revolution, if you would, and yet whose social leadership was so instrumental in helping to cause revolutionary change. We should mention that he broke barriers in film and in television, winning awards in both fields, but at the same time, always concentrating on political activism and other charitable causes. I do want to point out, Barbaralee, as you had done, because each is so significant to show why he is an all-time musical great. He really was singled out for the nation's highest creative honors in receiving the coveted Kennedy Center honor in 1989, the National Medal of Arts in 1994, and he did, from the Recording Academy, receive a Lifetime Achievement Grammy in the year 2000. You don't get that by being an incidental player. He was a great musical figure, singular, historic, with a distinctive voice and material that was so unique and different. And then in the year 2014, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave him its Gina Herschel Humanitarian Award in recognition of his lifelong fight for civil rights. That combination is singular and unique. Being a great musical figure throughout the years, concerts. I remember being young and seeing a Harry Belafonte concert, unique, different, spirit different, incredible look, incredible, powerful performer. And when you combine that with his meaningful lifelong fight for civil rights, Harry Belafonte was a true musical and social pioneer. And as today attests, he will be long remembered as a giant cultural hero.
Thank you, Clive. I always evaluate the evaluator. He could not get higher praise from a more relevant source. Thank you for all those kind words, accurate words about his life as an activist, an actor, a singer, and a very fine human being. Our last speaker was called by President Barack Obama the voice of the voiceless and a champion for the downtrodden. Reverend Al Sharpton has been preaching since age 4 and was licensed and ordained at age 9. You're going to have to take a moment and explain that to us, please. The author of several books, most recently, Righteous Troublemaker. He is one of the preeminent civil rights leaders of our time. Reverend Sharpton is the founder and president of the National Action Network, anchors Politics Nation on MSNBC, and hosts the nationally syndicated radio show, Keeping It Real, and the Hour of Power. He holds weekly action rallies, speaks out on behalf of those who have been silenced and marginalized, and rooted in the spirit and tradition of Reverend King, he founded the National Action Network, which has more than 100 chapters nationwide and promotes one standard of justice, decency, and equal opportunity. Reverend Sharpton, you've had a long and varied career. How did you become so involved with Harry Belafonte? What pursuits did you share?
I think that when I was a youngster, I started in Operation Breadbasket, which was the economic arm of Martin Luther King. And I became youth director of the New York chapter when I was 13 years old. I joined when I was 12. I was already a preacher, and they have boy preachers in the Pentecostal church. That's how I started. And I was mentored by Reverend William Jones, who was the New York chapter leader, and Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was the national leader. It was not long after getting involved in Breadbasket that I first saw Harry Belafonte. And Harry Belafonte was a larger-than-life figure. My mother was just awed. I grew up single-parent home in the hood in Brooklyn. She was awed that I had met Harry Belafonte. And you must remember that Harry Belafonte was the first Black that crashed in a consistent basis, the color line, both in terms of consistently with television and with motion pictures. So he was it's hard to even compare an artist that had that kind of following and regard and commercial value today that Harry Belafonte had as a breakthrough artist. But to use that kind of celebrity and to use that tremendous perch to connect to a cause was unprecedented. I don't think we've seen anyone since do it. I've seen some that would endorse some things or tweet some things, but to actually get involved where Harry Belafonte not only financed things, but he was part of the marches, part of the protests, part of the strategy session. And he supported the leaders, whether they were the leaders of SNCC, whether it was Dr. King, no matter what it was, he didn't try to supplant them. He didn't have to. He was Harry Belafonte. Just embracing them gave legitimacy and a sense of energy to the movements. So I knew him from afar. As I grew and got into my 20s and 30s, we'd end up at the same rallies. He was an avid supporter of 1199, the local union here founded in New York, led by Leon Davis. And we got to talking. And little by little, we got closer and closer. And I would say what kind of really struck me is Harry said to me one day, he said, Sharpton, he says, you grew up mentored by some of Martin's men. I said, yes. He said, and you've gotten close with his son, Martin III. He and I worked together for the last 30 years. We're getting ready to do a march in August of this year together. He says, and therefore his mother. I said, yes. He said, well, Martin was not my mentor. He said, I loved Martin. I supported Martin. But my mentor was Paul Robeson. I said, really? He said, yes. And he told me the story of how he was trying to become an actor and trying to get involved. And he was at the theater in Harlem, and Sidney Poitier was one, and Paul Robeson came in, and that was his hero. So in many ways, one of the things that was striking to me about Harry Belafonte is he was probably one of the most honest people I would ever meet. He would say, I'm going to support this, though I am not really 100% believer that that's the right way. I think it is an option that we need to use. And he would always challenge you. Why are you doing this? Defend that. And if I were doing something that he felt the rhetoric got out of hand, he would sit down and challenge me. I saw you on television say this. Why'd you say that? I said, well, you know, sometimes we get frustrated and the crowds are frustrated and you got to deal with that. He says, oh, I see. So you play to the frustration of the crowd rather than try to deal with the contradiction that the crowd is frustrated about. And that was Harry Belafonte. You had to go to see Harry is like doing a homework for a Regents exam when I was going through public school in New York. You better know what you're going to defend, and you better watch what you say. And as time went on and I got older and he and I got closer for a time, I lived across the street from him on the Upper West Side. And I would get to come by every once in a while and see him and Pam in the later years. And I remember when I got 11 years ago, my television show, I asked him to come and he said, I don't do everybody's television show. I said, all right, I thought I'd ask. He said, I didn't say no, did I? I said, no. He says, don't cut off the conversation until I'm finished. He says, what is the purpose of me coming on? And we went through it. And once I laid out what it is, he said, I'll tell you what. I said, what is that, Mr. B? He says, I'm going to come on your show. And you do it for the reasons you said. We had a certain cause, certain thing we wanted to do. He was going to talk about some of his life. He said, but I'm doing it to help you defy those that said you couldn't handle the show. I'm doing it for you. As long as we know each other and know each other's motives. That was Harry Belafonte. And all the way till the end. I mean, I saw him when he was where they had to they were going to give him the award from France, and he invited a select group to come to the basement of his building, and I was honored to be one of them. And I talked to him not long before he passed. He never stopped being a teacher. He never stopped being committed. He never stopped being an activist. I believed he used his singing and activism, his singing and acting as a means, but his ends was he wanted to change the world. And he wanted to be part of things that would really change the world. And he did not want to judge people. He just wanted to know that they were sincere and that they were about what they said. And he, being Harry Belafonte, he did not have to support what he did not support. He didn't need to be trendy. He didn't need to be playing what was the theme of the day. He was, and he knew what he was. And if he leaned in, he would lean in behind a union boycott as quickly as he would go to being invited by the Kennedys to the White House. He understood himself. He embraced who he was. And because of that, he backed movements that wouldn't have happened without him. If it wasn't for Harry Belafonte, a lot of the things that happened in social justice from the 60s to the 2020s wouldn't have happened. I remember when New York City police shot Sean Bell, he helped us lead the march down Fifth Avenue during Christmas shopping. He marched. He didn't only just send a check. He would march. He would get out there. He would walk with the laborers. He understood that that would help to give energy and strength to those that were on the front line. And he never stopped challenging those that were the results of the movement that ended up in higher places, that he wanted them to know you got there because of little people. He would challenge me, tell Obama so-and-so, tell so-and-so certain things. He was always consistent. He was always following the same values and standards he had when I first met him as a young teenager. So Harry Belafonte, we'll never see one like him again. I just thank God, and he will tell me that's you and God. But I just thank God that I got to know Harry Belafonte, because
Well,
there'll never
thank
be
you
one like that again.
for helping us know more about, excuse me, Harry Belafonte, and a message that I think most of us will remember today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your passionate and informative words. And now I'm going to ask Gina Belafonte to read the text, please, of the cultural medallion. And to those who are so patient to listen, I promise you will hear some of Harry Belafonte's wonderful voice before this program is over. Gina?
Thank you. Before I read this, I want to say one more thing about my father, which is that he used to say, this is a good example of his sense of humor. He used to say that he was the best actor that ever lived. And, you know, someone would ask, well, why? Well, why is that? Why do you think you're the best? And he said, because I've convinced you all that I'm a singer. So there you go. And I also want to, from, you know, myself and other family members who have joined us today, thank you all so much for coming, and for everyone who spoke. It's been so rich and very lovely, especially for us to hear all the kind words and memories. So thank you very much. So the medallion reads, Harry Belafonte, March 1st, 1927, to April 25th, 2023, 300 West End Avenue, Manhattan. Born in Harlem to West Indian immigrants after a year in the US Navy, 1944 to 1945, Harry Belafonte worked as a janitor's assistant. Given 2 tickets as a gratuity to the American Negro Theater, he fell in love with acting and eventually joined the A&T Productions. To pay for new school acting classes, he sang in nightclubs and quickly achieved fame as an actor and singer. The first Black performer to win an Emmy, 1960, and first recording artist to sell over 1 million copies of a single album with Calypso, 1956, Deo. He was awarded a Tony, 1954, for his role in the musical review John Murray Anderson's Almanac, an EGOT, and the recipient of many honors, 3 Grammys, 1962, 1965, 2000 Lifetime Achievement, Kennedy Center Honors, 1989, the National Medal of the Arts, 1994, an Oscar, 2014, the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award, a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, 2022. Belafonte was a fervent activist and outspoken advocate for justice who worked to advance social equity and peace in the US and abroad. His apartment here was a refuge and meeting place for artists and civil rights leaders, including his friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Thank you. And thank you to all those who participated in this exciting program and who helped make it possible. Most of all, thanks to Harry Belafonte and to our audience. By the way, if you know of an individual who's made a significant contribution and have verifiable information about where they lived or worked in a building that still stands, still exists, please let us know. Thanks again to each and all of you for joining us today for celebrating the remarkable life and work of Harry Belafonte.
Daylight come and me want go home. Work all night and a drink a rum. Daylight come.